Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It is a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to get your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. Tom Harris joins me now, who's the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Mr. Harris, thanks a lot for taking the time tonight.
Yeah, good to be on, Lars.
So you wrote over the weekend about the flaw in Donald Trump's energy plans. Where do you see the flaws?
What they're doing is they're saying that CO2 is not the control knob for climate, which is exactly what Perry said 2 weeks ago, and that's great. But then they go around talking about reducing carbon dioxide through nuclear power or sequestration. So that doesn't really make any sense. And what they're going to do is they're going to end up with a lot of problems where people are saying, why are you calling it clean coal? I mean, is there a problem with carbon dioxide? And, of course, carbon dioxide is not unclean. So you don't have to remove the CO2 from the emissions to have clean coal. All you have to do is remove the real pollutants. So Secretary Perry has got to make it more clear. And the same thing with Trump. I mean, he said, for example, 2 weeks ago, that they might get back into a new Paris Agreement if it was more fair and balanced. But if CO2 is not the control knob of climate, if, as Trump has said in the past, the climate science that supports Paris is wrong, then you don't need a new Paris, whether it's fair or not. You just don't need it. CO2 is not a problem.
So why do you think there's such a mixed message here? Is this the inexperience of Donald Trump? Is it the influence, perhaps, of Ivanka Trump, who I think is one of those people who is, concerned about CO2? I tend to look at it and I see what the numbers have done over the last 20 or 30 years as the models were predicting as soon as you get to this point in CO2 in the atmosphere, you're going to have, pure chaos and warming and everything else. And then I look at the actual numbers from NOAA and they don't support that. So I'm with you. I don't view it as a pollutant. I don't view it as a leading, as a cause of a warming planet. It might be an effect of a warming planet, but there's a huge difference between one and the other.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right. It's an effect of warming climate. And the oceans give off more CO2 when they're warmer. But, I think what this is basically, Lars, is it's a problem in the back room with their communications people and their strategists. I used to work for a PR firm, and before that I worked in the Canadian House of Commons, and I saw this all the time. I mean, they want to basically please various constituencies, so they're saying things that they think will please everybody. Okay, even they're completely inconsistent, and they are going to run into troubles. I mean, last week Perry was at the Longview coal generating station in West Virginia, and the reporter from the New York Times said, "What exactly does the administration mean by clean coal?" Okay, so they're going to run into this trouble because if they're saying that CO2 is not unclean, it's not the cause of climate change, then why do they lump it in under clean coal?
See, and yet, isn't there a sensible answer to that? Because the way I perceive it, when you burn something, you're generally going to produce some kind of either CO or CO2, even if you burn it very cleanly. And burning cleanly is not a bad thing, because I know that for a lot of people, tell me if you think I'm wrong about this, but I think for the average person, they imagine a coal-fired power plant, which most of them have never seen. I've seen a bunch of them as a reporter. They imagine as a giant factory with big smokestacks belching out huge clouds of black particulate-laden matter. Well, that's not what they're doing now, because under the current, requirements for building power plants, plants have had scrubbers and all kinds of other things added to make sure you're not loading up the atmosphere with either acids like sulfuric acid or things that'll turn into other noxious chemicals, and you're trying not to put too many particulate matter in the air. But it doesn't mean you're not exhausting CO2, but CO2 is odorless, colorless, and frankly good for the plants. So you can have both. You can have clean burning coal plants that still put out CO2, and if CO2 isn't a pollutant, clean doesn't have to refer to CO2. It could just refer to the fact that you're not putting effluent up there make it like what London in the early teens of the last century.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just put it perfectly, and that's exactly the kind of thing that Perry should say. I mean, when he was actually testifying before one of the Senate committees a few weeks ago, he jumbles them all up. I mean, he talks about carbon dioxide sequestration as if like it's a good thing because, oh, you get enhanced oil recovery because you can push it down into the ground and get more oil. Well, that's fine, but make it clear that you're not trying to store CO2 for the purposes of protecting the climate. So what they're doing is the communications people, and as I say, I saw this in the House of Commons, and I saw it when I was working for PR firms where we would actually advise companies on their messaging, that the communications people seem to think they can have their cake and eat it too. They can please the environmentalists by having CO2 sequestration and reduction of CO2, and they can please our side by saying CO2 is not a problem. But in the long run, maybe that'll get you through the day. But in the long run, it's going to bite them. It's going to bite them big time because people are going to say, why are you pushing nuclear power for CO2 reductions when you say CO2 is not a problem? Why are you pumping it underground if it's not a problem? Like, your message is inconsistent. And that's exactly the kind of thing the New York Times reporter was implying when they said, what exactly is the administration's definition of clean coal? Because they're going to be hit with that. It's really stupid. I mean, yeah, you might get through that particular briefing more easily by not telling, a direct story that's consistent. But in the long run, you're going to be hit hard because it doesn't make sense.
Somebody needs to write a one sheet for everyone. Here's our one sheet on coal. Here's our one sheet on healthcare. Here's our, but obviously they haven't been doing this a long time. Mr. Harris, keep up the good work at the Climate Science Coalition. We appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good to have you on the program.